Welcome back to Swordman Josh Gaming, and just wanted to do a deck tech today. Actually, I'm doing this deck tech for my archival purposes, but if anybody else gets some enjoyment out of this video, by all means, leave a comment and a like. But I'm doing a deck tech on this deck because I'm getting ready to disassemble this deck to make room for Yawgmoth. So this deck, I put it together when this bad boy came out, the Haunt of Hightower. It was a lot of fun to play. Played it in nine-man pods. Played it with 6-man. Played it in a standard 4-man. Played it 1v1. The deck was a lot of fun. It was pretty dangerous in a lot of situations. But I'm moving on to bigger and better things and think I just want to build Yawgmoth Thrain Physician. And I don't have the card collection to be able to support that. And also I'm not a big fan of having like 2 monocolored black decks. So this will be replaced by Yawgmoth. But I'll go ahead and read what Haunt of Hightower does. This was the buy a box promo, so it was only available in foil for Ravnica Allegiance. So it's 2 black, 4 colorless for 3/3 flying lifelink. Whenever the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player discards a card. So you can guess what this deck's going to be. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on Haunt of Hightower. So this is a little bit of a Voltron-y deck. You try to control the board with it, have them discard all of their cards, and then use... I've had Haunt all the way up to about 130 attack and defense, maybe a little bit higher. There's only a couple ways to make him unblockable in here. But in general, he'll just swing out every turn, and hopefully you've destroyed all of their creatures or controlled the board enough where it's not a problem. Normally I have a better strategy on how I'm going to present a deck tech, but like I said, this one's a quick deck tech before I disassemble this deck. So it may not be quite as coherent as it normally is, but hopefully you guys get the idea. So there are 2, this is the first deck I ever ran Planeswalkers in, and there are 2 in here. The first one is Liliana Vess. So she's here to be able to have your opponent's discards a card. So 2 black, 3 colors. She comes in with 5 loyalty. Her +1 is target player discards a card. Imagine that. Her -2 is search your library for a card, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. So she provides tutoring for this library, which isn't a bad thing. And her -8 is to put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control. I got this ultimate once, and it's just game ending because this deck basically plays in such a way that everybody's top decking, including you for the most part, unless you get some draw engines going. Nobody's really going to play with a hand. Everybody's top decking the best they can. The next one is Liliana of the Dark Realms, 2 black, 2 colorless. Her +1 is to search your library for a swamp card, reveal it, and put it in your hand, then shuffle your library. So she provides the ramp, because there's not much ramp in mono black. And you'll notice this deck is very more budget friendly, because I'm not running all of the tutors. I'm actually not running any tutors. Her -3 is target creature gets +X/+X or -X/-X until the end of turn, where X is the number of swamps you control. So it allows her to help control the board. And then her -6, which I've never used, is you get an emblem where swamps you control have tap and provide black, 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 black to your mana pool. So a lot of ramp. Those are the only 2 Planeswalkers in the deck. The only 2 Planeswalkers I've ever had in a Commander deck. Or I should say the first Planeswalkers I ever put in a Commander deck. So we'll get into the creature base first. All but one of the creatures. You'll catch the trend. Stronghold Rats. When it deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card. That includes you. So there is a downside of this. The way it's built is you're not going to be having a lot of cards in your hand either. So you're hoping to have Haunt out and being able to control the board in other ways. But it has shadows. So more than likely, not everybody at the table is going to have a shadow creature. I don't see it a lot. So he attacks every turn. Everybody discards a card every turn. Mosaic Mummy. When it enters the battlefield, each player discards a card. Fell Spectre. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. And whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. There's a couple of these abilities in here where whenever an opponent discards a card, they lose life. I believe it's always 2 life, so all of that taxing can really add up. We have Cunning Lethomancer. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card. That includes you. Sib-Sig Icebreaker. When it enters the battlefield, each player discards a card. We're catching a trend. Herald of Anguish. This has Improvise, so your artifacts can help pay for this, but there's not a lot of artifacts in here. It's a 5/5 flyer for 2 black and 5, and at the beginning of your end step, each opponent discards a card, so it stops you from having to do it. For a black and a colorless, you can sacrifice an artifact, and target creature gets -2/-2 until end of turn. We have Rotting Rats. So when it comes into play, each player discards a card, but it also has Unearth, so if it dies, you don't care, so you can unearth it, and each player discards a card again. Scythe Scepter. Again, when a Scythe Scepter deals combat damage to a player, each opponent discards a card. Each player who discards a card with the highest converted mana cost among the cards discarded loses life equal to the converted mana cost. So this is a great card for getting in later in the game as well. Burglar Rats. When it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card, so not you. Mind Slicer. If it's put in the graveyard from play, each player discards their entire hand. Bloodhusk Ritualist. It's got a multi-kicker of just black, and it's foily, so it's not showing up too well. But it's a 1 black, 2 colorless for a 2/2, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card for each time this was kicked. So great when you get down to 1v1. Or if somebody's drawing a lot of cards. Let me stack those guys up. A little bit of graveyard hate here. Yixilid Jailer. Cards in graveyards lose all abilities. We're not doing a lot in the graveyard, and it helps with some people who like to monkey around with their graveyards. Ramp card, Cryptghast, has Extort, and whenever you tap a swamp for mana, you get to add an additional black. Great in a mono black deck. A more mana ramp, we have Magus of the Coffers, 2 and tap it, and add black to your mana pool for each swamp you control. We have Sepulchral Primordial. So we do have ability to it's black. We're going to play some graveyard recursion. This is a great one. When it enters the battlefield, for each opponent, you get to put one of a target creature card from that player's graveyard onto your battlefield under your control. And that's permanent. It's not till end of turn. So with all of the discarding going on, for everybody you're playing with, you get to get a creature from everybody's graveyard. So if you're playing a 7-man group, you're going to get, hopefully, 6 creatures, the 6 best creatures out of everybody's graveyard, into your hand. Butcher of Malakir to help with controlling the board. So this shouldn't need any introduction, but whenever the Butcher dies or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Archfiend of Infinir. Whenever you cycle or discard another card, put a -1/-1 counter on each creature your opponents control. And he has cycling himself. There's not any cycling in here, but being since a lot of this stuff makes you discard cards, if he's out in play, your opponents aren't going to have much in the way of a board state. So it's all about trying to control your opponent's board states. It does really well in my meta a lot because everybody's playing creatures, and this really hates on a lot of creatures. We can control some board state also with Priest of Forgotten God. So tap it, sacrifice 2 of my creatures, which can also be my opponent's creatures if I steal them. Any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature. And then you get to add 2 black mana to your mana pool and draw a card. And now we have some other stuff to help control the board state. Merciless Executioner. When he enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Plaguecrafter, same thing. Enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, so it gets them as well. And each player who can't discards a card. So it's the double-edged sword of both making sacrificing creatures and getting the planeswalkers, but if they don't have it, they don't get away scot-free. They have to discard a card. We have Fleshbag Marauder. When it enters battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature. Sangromancer. For all these creatures dying, we need to get some kind of bonus. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you gain 3 life. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you gain 3 life. So you can gain a lot of life. There's not a lot of ways to gain life in black, but Sangromancer in this deck will do a lot of work for you. And then last but not least, in our creature base, except for one artifact creature, we have the Archfiend of Depravity. At the beginning of each opponent's end step, that player chooses up to 2 creatures he or she controls and sacrifices the rest. So like I said, we have all of this discard in here and all of this creature sacrifice, and Haunt doesn't care how things get to the graveyard. It just cares that things get to the graveyard. So Haunt grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. Archfiend of Depravity, if you have that down and you have Haunt, then you're pretty much set to dominate the game. Unless if somebody destroys your Haunt of Hightower, of course. So going into artifacts, because there's one creature left that I haven't discussed, and it's a great creature. I actually added this. It's an It That Betrays. It's an Eldrazi, of course. 12 mana to get it out. We can cheat that some with like an Animate Dead. I don't have Reanimate in here. I don't own it, so it's not in the deck. But it has Annihilator 2, and whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent, put that card onto the battlefield under your control. So all of these things in here that say each opponent sacrifices a creature or a planeswalker, all of that stuff gets to come back to us. I added this after I played in that 9-person pod. I saw how well It That Betrays worked because I kept stealing it from one of my opponent's graveyards. I think I stole it about 4 times that game because they kept destroying it. And I just added my own copy in here. So now we'll get into the rest of the artifacts because that is the last creature, unless if I missed one in one of these stacks over here. So like I said, almost everybody's going to be top decking at their best. So what do you have to do when nobody has cards to discard? So your Haunt can't grow anymore because at a point in the game, everybody has all the mana they need and they can cast every single thing they top deck. Well, you give them a card. Temple Bell. Just tap it, each player draws a card. And then you have each player discard a card at the same time. So if it's not instant speed, then everybody draws a card and then they immediately get rid of that card. Pretty mean, and it makes your Haunt grow, and it helps out with things like Waste Not, which we'll get into. It's one of the stronger cards in the deck. We have, also for drawing, we have Geth's Grimoire, which is just simply whenever an opponent discards a card, you get to draw a card. So these are the cards that allow you to start gaining advantage in card draw. There's not a lot of ways to draw cards in here, but these are a couple of them that make it so that way you can stay ahead and actually have cards in your hand where everybody else doesn't. I thought this one was interesting. I went ahead and put it in here. Like I said, it doesn't care how cards get to the graveyard. Haunt doesn't. So even if it comes off the top of their library, it's still going from their library. Milling is going to the graveyard. So we have Trepanation Blade. When a equipped creature attacks, defending player reveals cards from the top of his or her library until he or she reveals a land card. The creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each card revealed this way. That player puts the revealed cards into his or her graveyard. So this goes great on any creature, and it goes even better on Haunt because it will pump him a whole lot more. And that lifelink on Haunt, there's not a lot of commanders in black that I can think of that have lifelink on the body. Not a lot of commanders in general that I can think of that have lifelink in your command zone. This makes Haunt even that much stronger because all those cards immediately go into the graveyard. So Haunt gets double bigger, +1/+0 for each card that's revealed. Then they all immediately go in the graveyard. And then Haunt gets +1/+1 because all those cards hit the graveyard. So he hits even harder. Like I said, we don't care how the cards get to the graveyard, so if we can't have them draw cards and then discard cards, we'll just have them mill cards. So we have Whetstone. It's just really simple. For 3 mana, each player puts the top 2 cards of their library into their graveyard. That includes you. So Haunt gets bigger. It's all about Haunt getting bigger. Next, we have Altar of the Brood. This is actually turning into one of my favorite pet cards. I'll probably start seeing it in many more decks. But whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under my control, each opponent puts the top cards of their library into their graveyard. So in this particular case, even if I play a land, it's a permanent. Everybody mills 1, Haunt goes up by, and a standard pod, 3. We have Mind Crank. This one's pretty mean. Whenever an opponent loses life, that player puts that many cards from the top of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Hopefully that doesn't affect the video. If not, I'll re-record. But anyways, the first card is Waste Not. This is one of the powerhouses in the deck. So black and a colorless to cast it, it's an enchantment, so it stays out the entire time. Whenever an opponent discards a creature card, you get a 2/2 black zombie token. Whenever they discard a land card, you get 2 black mana. And whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, you draw a card. This is a turn 2 Waste Not is almost a guaranteed win in this deck, at least in my meta. I don't think I've ever played this on turn 2 and not won. Next is Animate Dead. Great to be able to play one of our rats, discard it, that betrays, and then reanimate it. And the last game I played with this before Destruction, this card did a lot of work. It's the quest for the Nihil Stone. Whenever an opponent discards a card, you just simply put a quest counter on this at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep if that player has no cards in hand. And this has more than 2 quest counters on it, that player loses 5 life. Or you may have that player lose 5 life, so you can use it for politics also. But in general, like I said, everybody's going to be top decking, so nobody's going to have a card in their hand at the beginning of their upkeep. So this just straight out does 5 damage to everybody every turn for the most part. A nerve, simply each opponent discards 2 cards. Necrogen Mist. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that includes you, that player discards a card from their hand. Vicious Rumors. Deals 1 damage to each opponent. Each opponent discards a card and puts the top card of their library into their graveyard, and you gain a life, all for 1 black mana. Great card. Dark Deal. Each player discards all the cards in their hand, then draws that many cards -1. So it's a windfall for black. And man, I will tell you what, this can pump Haunt of Hightower up really quick. This one has won me more than one game, especially for a later game. That's Torment of Hailfire. Yeah, I'm going to read this whole one because this is a very underplayed card from what I can see. I've never seen anybody play it, and when I played this card, most people didn't know what it did. But it's black, black, X, and you repeat the following process X times. So each opponent has a choice. Each opponent loses 3 life unless that player sacrifices a land, a non-land permanent, or discards a card. So we're going to assume that by the time we're playing Torment of Hailfire for an X value that's high enough to be meaningful, they have no cards in their hand. So what this comes down to is for X number of times, they're either going to lose 3 life each times X, or they're going to sacrifice a non-land permanent times X. So when this comes into play, I've cast this for as high as 11. It's crippling. Next we have Creeping Dread. At the beginning of your upkeep, each player discards a card. Each opponent who discards a card that shares a card type with the card you discarded loses 3 life. So you discard a land, somebody else discards a land, they're losing 3 life. Then discard an enchantment, somebody else discards an enchantment, they're losing 3 life. It doesn't happen a lot, but it is a constant discard for your opponents and yourself. Arterial Flow. Each opponent discards 2 cards. So it's only for your opponents. If you control a vampire, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. There is not a lot of vampires in this deck. However, Haunt of Hightower is a vampire. So with him in the command zone or hopefully on the battlefield, this pretty much guarantees that you'll get an extra 2 life. We have Tasker's Cruelty, which has Delve. Each opponent discards 2 life. Discards 2 life. Discards 2 cards. Siphon Mind. Each other player discards a card. You draw a card for each card discarded this way. So it's simply in a pod. Each player discards 1 card. You draw 3, all for 4 mana. It's a great, great card there. We have Megrim, which is another one of my foilies. Whenever an opponent discards a card, Megrim deals 2 damage to that player. Vona's Hunger. Each opponent sacrifices a creature, and if you have the city's blessing, so this is some removal stuff back here. Each opponent sacrifices half their creatures he or she controls rounded up. Cast down, destroy target non-legendary creature. Mutilate, all creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn for each swamp you control. You're playing mono black, you're going to have a lot of swamps in play. Generally just a board wipe. I put this in here, but it's meaner than just killing creatures. The only saga that's in here is the Eldest Reborn. So if you guys aren't familiar with sagas, during each upkeep it gets a saga counter, and each time it goes up, the next effect happens. So on the first turn when this enters play, each opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Great. On the second turn, each opponent discards a card. Wonderful. We're having stuff hit the graveyard. And then on the third phase, you put a target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So after they've all sacrificed a creature or planeswalker, they've all discarded a card. Let's say you have to discard. You don't have to discard a card. But this is how I got an It That Betrays. I played this with, there's a Dark Ritual in here. I played this on turn 3, I think. And nobody had any cards in their hand. And the moment this hit the third saga, I stole an It That Betrays. So that's the reason It That Betrays made it into this deck. Because the first time I played this deck and I played this card, I realized how strong It That Betrays is in here. We have Smallpox. Each player loses 1 life and then discards a card and sacrifices a creature, then sacrifices a land. That's each player, including you. Doomblade. Simply destroy a target non-black creature. Decree of Pain. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated, and then you get to draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. But you can also cycle it, and if you cycle it, all creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. So great against a token deck, where almost all of your creatures will live. Grisly Spectacle. This one's interesting. Destroy target non-artifact creature. Its controller puts a number of cards equal to that creature's power from the top of their library into their graveyard. So like I said, I've said it multiple times now, Haunt doesn't care how they get to the graveyard, only that they're going to the graveyard. We have Crypt Incursion. Exile all creature cards from target player's graveyard, and you gain 3 life for each card exiled this way. There are a couple of graveyard hosing cards in here. We are putting so many cards in people's graveyards, we don't want them to play with it when they're in there. So this is one way to graveyard hose. Raider's Wake. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Wonderful. And at the beginning of your end step, if you attacked with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. We have Liliana's Crest. Again, the same idea. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. We have Shared Trauma, which is a Join Forces card, and this one's interesting. So I'll just read it because it's kind of hard to explain. Starting with you, each player may pay any amount of mana, so X. Each player puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X is the total amount of mana paid this way. However, if I pay 10 and somebody else pays 10 and somebody else pays 10, that's 30 cards of everybody's library going into their graveyard. For the most part, every single time I've played this, unless if I'm playing somebody who has a Delver deck or something like that, nobody else is paying into this card. But even at that, for 1 black and X to have everybody mill that many cards is still a good value, especially if Haunt's on the board. And last but not least is Dark Ritual for some more mana ramp. Now to make this whole thing run, we have a base. Like I said, there's, for the most part, it's all basic swamps, but there are a couple utility lands in here. The first is Mortuary Mire. We are milling a lot of our own cards as well, and our cards can die. So it's another way of getting some graveyard recursion. So when it enters the battlefield, you can put target creature card from your graveyard on the top of your library. Simple, sweet, to the point. Allows you to get something back that you've milled away that you want back to be able to cast it. We have Bajuka Bog. When it enters the graveyard, exile all cards from target player's library. Like I said, we are putting so many cards in people's graveyards, we have to find a way of exiling those graveyards, especially if they're able to play graveyard synergies a whole lot more than we are, and we don't have a lot of that. Rogue's Passage, the only way in here to make Haunt of Hightower unblockable, but if you make him unblockable and you have Rogue's Passage out, it's almost a game winner. Temple of False God, add 2 mana to your mana pool, activate it if you only have 5 or more lands in play. So a little bit of mana ramp, especially if it comes down on turn 6. We have Cabal Stronghold. 3 mana, tap it, add black for each basic swamp you control. So, and you can tap it for a colorless, so it serves as a regular land as well, but later in the game it serves as mana ramp to cast some of these bigger spells. The mana curve on this deck is very high. We have Crypt of Agadim. Takes advantage of us putting a bunch of stuff in the graveyard. You can tap it for a black, but you can also 2 mana and tap it, and you can add black to your mana pool for each black creature in your graveyard. Mono black loves this card. We have Scavenger Grounds. So the big part about this is 2 mana and tap it and sacrifice it. Exile all cards from all graveyards, which includes yours, but this can be a lifesaver in multiple situations. And then at the end of the day, it's a mono black deck, so we have 29 swamps. Granted, my swamps are, I did something weird with this one. I made every single swamp be from a different artwork for every single swamp. Well, almost different artwork for every single swamp. So that is Haunt of Hightower as it sat. I was thinking about improving it and getting some more fast mana in here and getting rid of some of the cards that made everybody discard, including yourself, so that way you could get some more card advantage. But at this point, when this little boy was released, where's he at? Yawgmoth Thran Physician. This deck has problems with card draw. Yawgmoth fixes that. Yawgmoth fixes a lot of things. I pulled him out of my Modern Horizons box. Those, you can go back and you can look at the pull videos for Modern Horizons. I pulled him. I'm going to build him. He's going to be my new mono black commander, and he's going to be much spicier than Haunt was. Haunt was just casual and fun, but a headache to many because it became a who's the best top decker. Yawgmoth will be a more competitive deck, but I still don't have the mana crypts and basalt monoliths and things of that nature for fast mana, so it will be a little slower, so it should fit in my meta because we don't play CEDH. But that's where Haunt's going, so I wanted to make this for my own archival purposes for the deck that I built in case I ever want to go back to it. And if you liked it, or you want to send me a mana crypt, put a comment down below. I'll shoot you over my address. But hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content, and hit that bell notification if you want to know when I stream next. And as always, may Keep Calm Kitty be with you. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of their week. Good night, everybody.